I want to put question 6 and questions... Who's doing question 7? I want to put question 6 and question 7 together and ask you a question, which is sort of joins those two together, which is, imagine again that you're 70, or 80 even, and you've got grandchildren, and you're talking to them about, your youth when you were at university, and what has changed? What is the impact, do you think, of these protests? When you are 70, will we live in a gender-equal society? Will these protests have been successful? In what ways will they be successful, do you think? What is the impact that can't be denied? I mean, I don't know how many of you have been following events in America with the Kavanaugh, and people are saying this is what happened 20, 30 years ago with Anita Hill in this nomination. It's the same thing. I mean, it's not the same. There are differences, but not that many. Are these protests a complete and utter waste of time, or do they have an impact?
I wouldn't say they're a complete utter waste of time, but a woman is raped every 4 minutes still, regardless whether there was a total shutdown march or not. I think it's necessary to have the public protests and individual ones, but I do think that their impact will not be seen in the next 2-3 years. I think we're still in the infancy stages, and the actual impact will probably only be able to measure in the next coming years. At this point, the stats remain the same, regardless.
Anybody else want to add to that? Yep.
I think it has some kind of impact, because I think the law changed last year or the year before for reporting sexual assault. So now there's no time limit in South Africa for sexual assault. Anyone can report it at any time. So to an extent with the law, yes, it helps, but it doesn't really help. I mean, last month we had the total shutdown march, and this month you hear, I don't know how much stories I heard last week of different kinds of rapes and sexual assault happening to women. So to an extent, kind of, but not really.
I beg to differ. I think it's with all of these persistent acts of resistance and protest that eventually leads to change. I think if it's not for that kind of pressure and for that kind of collective awareness, then nothing would happen. So in a way, it's not completely useless. It does contribute in small ways, I think.
It's going back to what she said about law. We watched a documentary in one of our ethics modules about a woman that got raped, and it was a black lesbian woman, and she went to police officials, and they told her to go to the place where this guy was and to see if he's there, and then come out again and tell them if he is there. So it's okay. It's fine if we have a law that protects a woman, but we need people to enforce these laws. We need to be able to count on our police officials and government officials to enforce and practice these laws in order for equality to start taking place and for women to feel protected and safe in their environments. So it's not a waste of time, but we need people to enforce laws, and we need people to enforce it so that it can happen.
Do you see any evidence of change in any of the posters that you've looked at? Because I did. There were things that had changed. And specifically, it was those little tiny protests, the individual protests, the washing up protest. Something had changed there. The other one that struck me as an example of change was the 2 mugs one. Did you all see that? Wherever that's gone. I don't know where. Okay, it's over there, and it's 2 mugs, and it says hers and hers, and it's a story about going into a shop in Darling or Malmesbury or some dorp, and there's a his and a hers mug, and the customer wanted 2 hers mugs. And the shop assistant says, oh, we can't do that, we'll go to the manager. And the manager says, yes, sure, no problem, we can just swap one out. The shop assistant says, but then we have 2 hises. And the manager says, well, that's fine. There'll be 2 hises coming in and buying one. And I can't see that happening. I mean, that's a sign of change for me. So there are moments of change. Whether it adds up to anything to, your lives and when you're 70 are dramatically different. Whether you're going to be fighting the same battles, or your children will be fighting the same battles, I don't know. But the thing to do for this last question, or these last 2 questions, to think about the ways in which these protests do or don't contribute to gender and sexual justice, is to look for elements of change in these posters. Can you find things that have changed? And maybe it's you need those big protests that raise consciousness, that have an impact on what somebody does in the home, which has an impact on how things happen in the home, which then has an impact on consciousness. So it's a rolling, if you like, a rolling impact. Is that making sense? So what you need to be doing with your analysis is answering these questions basically, and you don't have to answer them exactly like this, but you have to draw on the data. You can't be saying the protest will be useless if you're ignoring the data. Every claim you make, you've got to back it up with data. Is that making sense? If you want to say it's primarily black women who are involved in these protests, as you can see from Artifact 1 and 6 and 9 and 12 and 39 and whatever, you have to be able to make that claim on the data. So, what else do we need to talk about?
In terms of this.
The other piece to this is that you should be linking your analysis to the literature. So you've read some of the literature, and the literature says X and Y and Z. Is that what you're seeing in these protests? Or are you seeing something different? Because then you must challenge the literature. So what's going to happen with your data analysis is that you will write it as a draft. It will be marked by the markers, who will be brutal and cruel as they always are. And you then get a chance to rewrite it for your final research report. Is that making sense? So you have a draft analysis, you draw on this video that we've got here, you draw on the analysis, the preliminary analysis that has been undertaken. Have a look in much more detail at some of the posters, the artifacts, and develop your analysis. Do you feel that you could do that? You could have a go at it. So the focus is on the data, on this piece. So your final research report is going to have an introduction. It's going to have a literature review, which is about other people's research, what other people have said. Then it's going to have a methodology section, which is about how you went about gathering data. And then the analysis. This is the original research bit, is where you analyze this data. It's your take on this data. It's where you use all the skills that you've been developing over the last 3 years at university. And that's what postgrad students do. They go off and they gather data and they analyze it. It's exactly what you're doing. They just do more. They spend years doing it. Anyone, any questions? No questions?
Maybe we can just indicate also, Lindsay, how we should reference the class
Yes.
recording today.
Do you want to?
No, I can't remember how we did it last year. I think it was
We
just-
didn't have
We didn't have a
We
recording.
didn't have a recording. But I think we just said WGS 321
Class discussion.
Class discussion.
So if you want to recite, you can quote from this video if you want to watch it again. Or if somebody who wasn't in the class wants to watch the video, you can quote from it. But you've got to put it in quotation marks. You have to say WGS class discussion, and you can add the date, which is the 1st of October 2018. You won't remember everybody's names, so we won't worry too much about names, but just quote, you're able to quote this as well. Any questions, comments, thoughts, anxieties? You're all good to go? Okay. Then can we tell Andre to switch the camera on? Thank you. Yes.